Welcome to our notes today for Thursday, March 26th. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about different species and how they evolve. So we left off on letter G. All right, so again, remember a species is different because they don't interbreed. If they're two different species, they're not going to interbreed with each other. So species divergent, two populations of a species have diverged or separated, and a new species has evolved from an old one. So oftentimes they move to a different geographical location, or something has happened that they're split apart. And over the time, they become more and more different, so they no longer will breed together. So both species will continue on their separate ways, maybe again because they move to a different area. If there's a significant difference in two populations, then they can no longer interbreed and they become two different species or two different species. So this is what has happened with the Galapagos finches. We're going to talk about the lemurs of Madagascar. So we're going to be going through some more examples as we continue on. So adaptive radiation occurs when many similar but distinct species evolve relatively rapidly from a single species or from a small number of species. So this occurs when variations within a population allow certain members to exploit a slightly different niche in a more successful way. So this is what happened with the Galapagos finches. So it was believed that a large group of one finch left the mainland of Ecuador and ended up landing on the various Galapagos Islands. Depending on what food was on that island, if their beaks were just right that they could eat that food, they would stay on that island. If their beak did not allow them to eat that food, they would have to move on to a different island or not survive. So over time, the beaks became more pronounced based on the food that they were eating. So a niche that we talk about is a position or role within a community of an ecosystem. So niche is what they eat, where they sleep, when they breed, all the different things that make them survive in their environment. So in your home, you have your own niche. You might be the firstborn, the last, the middle child, an only child. You might have your own room or a space in the house that's yours. You might have a chore that you do that's different from everyone else. So that's your niche. In ecosystem, all the animals want to have their own niche, so they don't have to compete with others. A new species can evolve by natural selection and the presence of a barrier. So a barrier is something that can separate a population. It could be a mountain range, a body of water. Again, with the islands of the Galapagos, the water separated the different islands. Again, a different geographical barrier. So one really good example of this are primates found in Madagascar and the Comoro Islands off Africa. So millions of years ago, lemurs were able to grow to a large number due to the lack of competition from monkeys or apes. The large number of offspring meant a greater diversity of traits. So there's over 100 species of lemurs on Madagascar, and they each have a little different niche, maybe where they are in the trees or if they're on the ground, what part of the island they live on, what food that they eat. They're all a little bit different. Today, there are many different species of lemur with different specialities due to adaptive radiation. So they probably all started off as one type of lemur, and then over millions of years, as they spread out to different parts of the island, they became more and more different. So now we have over 100 species of lemur. Some are adapted for living in trees, some just stay on the ground, some live in rainforest areas, other in desert areas of Madagascar. Most are active during the day, but some are nocturnal. So again, they all have their unique niche. So I have two videos of lemurs that you can watch kind of how they move and some of the different types. I'll post it on the box. Feel free to watch one of them at least, or both of them. They're both a little bit different. Gives you a good kind of idea of some of the different species and also why they're endangered in Madagascar. Lemurs are found today only on these islands, but fossils have been found in Africa, Europe, and Asia. So the question is, why are they no longer in those countries? Why are they only on these select islands? Well, it was thought that lemurs are probably not successfully in competing with apes and monkeys. So apes and monkeys are much larger. It was too hard for them to compete for the same resources. So they ended up dying off and moving out of those larger countries. So continents and islands tend to either have the lemurs or Arthropodas, the monkeys and apes, but not both types of primates. So you're not going to find monkeys and apes on Madagascar. You're just going to find the lemurs, but you'll find monkeys and apes in other places in Asia and Africa. Okay, so they cannot live in the same spot. They compete too much for the resources. Again, another good example of adaptive radiations are the finches on Galapagos Islands. Probably was one species of finch that evolved into 13 different species of finch. The different beak shapes allow them to eat different foods on the different islands. Again, the idea is they all had one basic finch, but within that finch population, they probably had slight variations in their beaks to begin with. Some were a little bit longer, some were a little bit shorter, wider, and so on. Just like humans, we have all come in all different shapes and sizes, even though we're still the same species of humans. So the ones that had slightly bigger beaks could do better on an island with harder nuts. So over time, they evolved into 13 different types. We're actually going to, on Monday, have a little video lesson and a little worksheet about a couple that spent most of their lifetime studying the finches on the Galapagos Islands, some really unique research and what they were able to find. So we're going to do a focus day on that on Monday. So we'll learn more about that. Right, so continuous variation and gradual divergence. So this figure shows that species A, B, C, and D come from a common ancestor. Okay, so down here at the bottom, where we have the circle point here, the line, this is a common ancestor. And at this point, something happened. But they're now separate species that could not produce fertile offspring if they were made together. So something happened. Again, maybe they moved to a different area. Maybe there was some sort of geographical barrier. Something happened that caused this split. So the speciation split happens right here. So we had one group went off and ended up to be species A. Another group continued. And again, there was another split for species B, continued on, and another split between C and D. So when we look at a picture like this, you can see the ones that are most commonly related. So C and D split in least amount of time. So they are more closely related. And so B, C, and D are more closely related to each other than they are to A. A is going to be the most different because it's split off in a more years ago. So some species can have various splits over time and create greater diversity between species that no longer resemble each other anymore. Within a species that has a wide geographical distribution, there can be measurable differences in DNA. So over time, their DNA has changed. And again, that can be looked at with DNA testing. So some of the reasons why they might change, climate and soil are different in different areas. So even just within the United States, the northern part of the United States, to the southern part of the United States, or even just within a state itself, the climate and soil can be very different from one area to the next. Populations adapt to the conditions available, and some versions of genes will be selected for and others will be selected against so that the populations are best adapted to their areas. So this is called selective pressure. Okay, something is selecting them to pick the genes that are best suited and allow that species to survive in that area. The difference between the two separate populations become too great, then they would become separate species at some point. In our last idea for today, transient polymorphism. Okay. So we think of the word poly, okay, many, morphism, morphology are the different structural of an organism. So polymorphism is different versions of a species that can be the result of a mutation. Okay. So it's the same species, but there's different versions of them, okay? So one prime example that a lot of textbooks use is a peppered moth. Okay, so a peppered form is the gray form. It's camouflaged against light surfaces like trees with lichen. Okay, so in this picture here, if you notice real carefully, there's actually two peppered moths. So this tree is covered with lichen, kind of a lightish green, gray colored lichen that grows on trees. And this peppered moth really is camouflaged to that lichen. Where this one here is this different form where it's black and it really stands out on that tree. So the monolic black form is a rare mutation, 1% of the population. It's easily seen against a light color lichen and are often eaten by birds. So birds can see them very easily because they're not camouflaged, so they would eat them. So we have less of them in the population. It's more of an advantage in this case to have the peppered gray form. Now, something happened during the mid 1800s. The Industrial Revolution started. If you think of in England, London, so the malic form increased in numbers. So now the black form was more popular. And the reason for that, the lichen was sensitive to air pollution produced by the Industrial Revolution, and the lichen began to die. Air was filled with black soot from burning coal. So now the trees no longer had the lichen, and they had kind of a dusty soot on them. So now the trees were more black. So those that were originally black, they were now surviving because the birds were not able to see them, and the peppered color was standing out, and now the birds were eating those. So the camouflage of the peppered form of the moth was no longer working since the trees were now darker. So now we're going to see a switch over that now it's more beneficial to have the black coloring. So that black form had reached 95 to 100% of what we could see in the population. Just very quickly it changed. Today, the malic form, black doesn't go above 30%. It's often close to zero due to improvements in air quality since 1956. So now it's switched back again. The lichen is returned to the trees. So now the peppered form has regained being in most, that we have the most of them. So transient polymorphism is the temporary changes in form of a species, light moth to dark moth, and then back to the light moth again. So based on conditions, the two different forms kind of changed in how much we had back and forth. Here's just a picture in England, okay, the light form, the dark form in different places. So there is a theory of knowledge box on page 228 in your textbook. I would like you to read that if you have a textbook. If you're able to get one at book pickup, go to read that. I will take a picture of and post it on PowerSchool Learning as well, just in case you weren't able to get that textbook. It's probably not as easier to read from the picture, but if you need to, go ahead. There's a couple questions there, and they're talking about some people don't think this pepper moth example is a very good example to include. So read that, think about it, and kind of what do you think? Okay. You don't have to type it up or anything like that, just something to think about. There's also a couple other boxes. There's two red theory of knowledge boxes. You can read both of them. There's even a little nature of science and another little information box. So feel free to read those. They just have some additional information. Okay, so that's it for our notes today. You will find there are two worksheets posted in the worksheets box. Again, they are PDFs, so feel free to print them off, write in on them, take a picture and upload that, or if you prefer not to do that or don't want to print them, you can just number the answers and just type in your answers. Either way is fine. So it's going to be worksheet 141 and worksheet 143. Again, remember today is Thursday, so you checked in today, but on Friday, because of the early dismissal schedule, you do not have to check in. So there will not be a daily question for Friday, just for today, Thursday. Okay. Let me know if you have any questions. Please feel free to email me at any time, and we'll do something a little bit different on Monday. We'll take a break from the notes. Have a good weekend. Bye.